Okay, I've got 3 o'clock, so hello and welcome to the Post-Fire webinar series. My name is Carrie Berger, and I'm the manager of Oregon State University's Extension Fire Program. The Fire Program is a new program in Extension, and we are gearing up as we speak to help facilitate landscape-scale cross-boundary management projects on the ground and to provide education and outreach to all Oregonians. Much like our forestry and natural resource extension colleagues, the fire program team will be living and working in communities throughout Oregon. I want to begin by acknowledging that it is an extremely stressful time with challenges that are affecting some of us in deeper ways than others. Please know that you are not alone. In today's session, we will come together and talk about what to do if you've been affected by wildfire. So before I begin, I have some webinar logistics that I'd like to quickly cover. This session is being recorded, and when I can figure it out, we're going to be streaming live to Facebook. So for all of you on the webinar, your audio has been muted. If you're having audio troubles and are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest hanging up and dialing in with your phone. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. Tiffany Hopkins, my wonderful colleague, will be monitoring the chat window, and she can definitely help you out. Thank you so much, Tiffany. If you have questions on the information that is being presented, please type your question in the Q&A window. We plan to pause at about 3:45 and again at 4:30 for a question and answer session with our presenters. Finally, you can adjust how you view the presenters by going to the upper right corner of your screen. You might choose to see all the presenters at once or just the person who is actually speaking. So today we will walk through, and I'm ahead of myself here, but today we will walk through a checklist that you can utilize to chart a course forward and modify, of course, to suit your needs. We will be touching on issues such as tree damage and erosion. In future webinars, we will do a deep dive on all of the issues. So join us next Thursday, and actually every Thursday through November. Next week at 3 p.m., we will talk about hazard tree identification and erosion risk and control. Registration is required for these webinars, so visit the Fire Program website for more details. So speaking of presenters, we have quite the lineup today, and I'd like to now introduce Daniel Lavelle, who is Oregon State University's new fire specialist, extension fire specialist, and Stephen Fitzgerald, who is Oregon State University Extension silviculture specialist. Thank you both for being on the line with us today. Daniel and Steve's presentation will provide you a flow chart and a checklist of what to do following a wildfire. Our extension group specializes in forestry and natural resources, and so that is our focus here today. We will not be providing any in-depth information on what to do if you've lost a structure. We encourage you to reach out to your personal insurance carrier or FEMA for information and resources. Following Daniel and Steve's presentation, we'll have about a 15-minute question and answer session. After Q&A, agency representatives will provide information about any technical or financial assistance being offered, what you need to do to apply, and who you might contact. There will be another opportunity to ask questions after their presentations. And don't worry if you don't catch all the information. I'll provide all the resources mentioned during this webinar on our Fire Program website under the Past Classes resource page. And I'll even follow up with an email just to be sure you get that information. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen here and let's dive in. Daniel and Steve, after the fire, now what?
Okay, I'll share my screen. Well, hi, everyone. We are going to discuss what to do after the fire, some steps to take when you return to your home and your property. And we're going to put like Carrie said, put the emphasis on safety and natural resource restoration rehabilitation. It's stressful, I know, and we want to bring some order out of chaos. And so we're putting an organization to it, and it follows our webinar series, essentially follows this flow chart with these main objectives: to look at what to do, some guides and some recommendations on the way home, back on the property, entering the house, do an outside assessment, make your contacts, obtain funding. And to clarify, I don't want to create false expectations. Funding may or may not be available, but our agents and agency reps and specialists will help you determine what funding is available and when it's available and who qualifies, who does not. We're going to give you information on contacting contractors and hopefully assist with getting your work done when it's possible to do that. And the basic resources we have on our fire program webpage. Everything I'll be talking about, any citations will be there. And I'm referring to this publication by Steve Fitzgerald and Yvonne Barkley, What to Do Safely Returning to Your Home After a Wildfire. And following this checklist. This is bringing order to what you're going to be looking at, and once your property has been affected by wildfire, we've organized some recommendations on what to do on the way back to your home, back on your property, going in the house. And then this second sheet, the back sheet to this checklist, is some assessment guidelines, what to look for, setting yourself up for technical assistance or for potential funding if it exists, but just a way to catalog and to make an assessment of what you have on your property. So a little more detail on your way back to your home. Again, we want to be sure to emphasize you need permission. You might need permission to go back to your home. Please don't enter areas, only enter areas that have been open to local residents or to the general public, and do so only if you have a reason to be there. Really, from a safety and liability perspective, we don't want to enable or encourage or empower anybody to go into fire areas without permission or without having a clear purpose to be there. Please be careful. Please contact law enforcement or authorities to do that. You can refer to Trip Check for road clearances, look for downed trees, shrubs, be very careful on the roads. Once it has burned over, we're going to talk a little bit more about hazard trees later, but you know, rocks loosen on cut slopes and above roads, or could be a very big danger, especially going in after dark if you need to. Be aware of standing trees, utility poles that may have been burnt, that are shaky, that could fall. Electric utility lines that have fallen, just be careful. Watch for downed power lines, and just be careful on your way home. Once you're back on your property, we called it situation awareness. Look up, down, all around. Be aware of smells and as well as sight. If you smell smoke, that could be a good indicator. If your gutters weren't clean prior to, or valleys on the roof weren't clean prior to, embers can be a real nuisance. And what we're encouraging you to do is to do a walk around, a check around your house before you enter, and hopefully you'll have protective equipment on, gloves, boots, because there could be potholes, there could be falling debris. You never know, just be careful. If you have a hard hat, put it on. Check for hot embers and gutters. Again, smell and look for flame, wisps of flame, and smell for gas. If you have natural propane gas, look for water leaks, check for structural damage to the house. And again, call 911 if you smell anything or see anything. Make sure your pump house well is in good working order. Make sure water is safe to drink, and look out for any damage to gas line, phones line, power lines, and contact your utility service provider if your main has been switched off, which some firefighters will do because utilities are a real problem. Once you go into the house, we're encouraging you, if the power is off in your house, turn on a flashlight outside the house, go into the house with a flashlight, turn the flashlight off as you search around the house. Again, smell for smoke, look for any flash of heat, feel for heat around the walls, and especially look in the attic. And again, check for structural damage. If everything is okay, make sure everything is off. Go down, turn your main circuit breaker on, and then you will have power. And discard any food that's been smoke tainted, or that if you're gone from the house for a while and not refrigerated, be careful of rotten food. And then outside and around your property, and this is what the second page is about. And it's really important to have an assessment of your property to determine what's been wrong. And what we're encouraging you to do is to look around and to follow this second sheet. And maps are very important. And I'm not talking about a land management plan per se, or a land management plan. I'm not talking about that per se, but these maps are in this publication I have a link to, which will be available to you on our website. And the map doesn't have to be fancy. Hopefully it could be consistent with a plan later on that you're building yourself up for that. But it's really important to document on your property where things exist. And following this sheet, you know, how much of the property was burned, valuable information, slope of your property, using topog lines, look at percent location of burn severity for vegetation, for soils, how close did the fire come to your water courses, how steep are the slopes, was there erosion on the property prior to, all very important information. That could be, if you could put it on a map, that would be really good. This is the publication on the left. I took those maps from, and honestly, if you are thinking about managing your property, this is a really good resource to look at. And our NRCS reps will be talking about conservation planning later. But hopefully you can be assisted to do a map that's consistent with these efforts. And it's important to map these things out, and it's important to know, like, intensity of the fire versus severity. We're asking to map fire severity, vegetation severity, or soil severity. And the difference is the fire line intensity, fire intensity is the measure of heat that a fire puts out. And severity, on the other hand, describes the immediate effects of fire on vegetation, litters, soils, which could have indirect effects on water. And that's what we're really trying to clue in here. And if that could be mapped for your property, it would be really good. And we're going to give you some guidelines on how to do that, how that is important. So and I just want to throw out that fire intensity correlates to fire severity, but it may not be exactly the same. You may have a hot fire that burned through high intensity, but you may not have a high severity fire, and likewise. So we're asking you to not only map how the fire burned on your property, but map the severity of the burn on your property. Now, severity maps do exist, and the burn area emergency rehab teams, the BEAR teams, are doing that for each incident, and they do have BEAR assessments available for each incident. And our fire program, Extension Fire Program, are trying to build a resource that would assist private landowners in not only looking at your tax lot maps, soil survey maps, severity maps, and to assist you on your property for that. And we can talk more detail on that later too. So mapping of severity is just like this. And what's important is to determine where your home is or your property is in fine scale on that large incident severity map. And again, we're trying to set up some assistance to you for that. Severity effects, burn severity is usually categorized in low, medium, high, and it affects vegetation and it affects soil, and there are signs and symptoms of each category of severity. With looking at light char, like for litter duff, for example, it's demonstrated in low is demonstrated in light char versus moderate ground char versus high is completely consumed, and leaves, twigs, branches have signs and symptoms of each category: woody debris, mineral soil, amount of trees killed, and erosion potential. And again, this is all very important and important to map on your property for future use for projects or funding or getting priorities of the projects on your property. It's really important to do in the short term for long-term use. And hazard trees are very important to map. And we're gonna do more details on the next webinar on how to determine hazard trees. Again, these publications, everything I'm referring to here is going to be available to you and in our webpage. And hazard trees are very important to identify, map out on your property. And we'll give you some guidelines to do that. And map, it's important to map water and potential flooding on your property for the perennial streams you have, or for seasonal streams. That's very important to do because of the effects either downstream for your neighbors or other property, or once the rains hit in the season. So it's important to go through this guideline. And again, we're going to go into more details on how to characterize and how to fill this out. But we're asking you to map out these points of severity and damage to property improvements, damage to roads, surface, ditches, or culverts, location of fire, burn bare soil. We're asking you to check that off and map it out. And also we're asking if you need assistance to do that. So in summary, we hope that we're giving you some tools of organization and order to bring that order out of the chaos, which is natural to feel when you return after a fire. And we just want you to be safe. Primary safety is all important. You and your family, your pets, your animals, safety is first. And we want to help you identify some rehabilitation restoration points that could cause problems later on or to properties around you. And that's essentially it.
Great. Thank you for that, Daniel. And Steve's going to come online here and bring up his presentation. And while he does that, I just want to bring your attention to the chat box. Tiffany has put in both the resources for that flow chart and also for that checklist. So go ahead and check those out and utilize those. So Steve, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, can everybody see that?
I cannot see your screen yet. I can see you.
Oh, okay. Let me try that again. Let's see. Can you see it now?
Mm-mm.
All right, let's try. Anything?
Nope. Do you want me to share my screen, Steve, for you?
Sure. Let's do
Okay.
that. You save time.
Okay, let's see if I have better luck. Oh, did you hit the share button in the corner of the screen? So you have to pick your screen and then
I did hit the share.
okay, let's see if it mine was being clunky yesterday. It happens. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay.
So can I advance this or do you have to?
I'll have to advance it for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. Hey, and thank you, Daniel, for setting me up. My presentation's broken into 3 different portions. I'm going to give you some background on water, water cycle and erosion, and talk a little bit about some potential mitigation treatments. Some of these may be, you can have financial assistance to help you with these. But I'm also going to talk about assessing trees for survival, and these would be trees out on your forest land. And finally, some final comments on salvaging the value of your timber and what kinds of questions you should be asking yourself about that. So, here on this slide, it's a little busy, but it shows a water cycle, hydrologic cycle, some rain splash, and a snowpack in a forest that has been burned and is now exposed to the sun. When a wildfire occurs and burns the soil and kills or consumes most of the vegetation and organic matter, it drastically changes the hydrologic cycle, and thus affects the capture and the retention or storage of water and the release of that water over time. Next slide.
Steve, I just learned that I can give you remote control, and so I've done that. Can you advance the slide? There you go. Okay. Amazing. Look at that.
So great, thank you. So what effect, how does fire affect the soil and increase the potential for erosion? Well, the first thing it can do is intense heat can create what we call hydrophobic soils. These are soils that are resistant to water movement through them. You could have a little bit of ash on top and then have this layer where the organic molecules have condensed on the soil particles and created an impermeable barrier. So now when the water hits, it doesn't penetrate or infiltrate into the soil. It can move then laterally. And so it reduces water infiltration. And of course, think of the organic matter, that mat of needles below on the forest floor. And a lot of times what that does is help dampen the effect of high rainfall events. Think of it as a sponge that absorbs and then slowly releases water to the soil. Well, when that organic matter is gone, all that water now is falling on bare soil. And if the soil has a hydrophobic layer, then it begins to move and taking soil with it. And just remember that a raindrop creates enough energy to really start to erode soil. We call it splash erosion. And so it's not moving. Here we go. So what that does is it increases runoff and erosion in dry gravel. Dry ravel is erosion during dry, when the soil is dry and it just breaks apart because there's no organic matter to hold the soil in place. And this can lead to localized debris flows when this occurs, particularly after high intensity rainfall events, either in the winter, or I have seen this in the summer after thunderstorms. And of course, these debris flows can affect water quality, the temperature and sediment delivery to streams, and that can have both effects on municipal water as well as ecological effects on stream habitat and fish. And also it can damage other human infrastructure like homes if they're below this, or roads or power lines. So the degree of effects that fire has on soils really depends on the severity that the area of the soil received, what Daniel was talking about, and how much of that watershed is actually affected by fire. And so the potential for erosion and some of these detrimental effects is really highest where you have the highest burn severity, and on steep slopes where once water begins to hit and not infiltrate and begins to flow down slope, it can then begin to pick up soil particles and increasingly larger debris, boulders, and logs and trees. And usually the highest risk is within the first 1 to 3 years, but it can last longer than that. So it just depends on the terrain, the soil type, and the amount of the watershed that's affected. So what are some things that we can do to mitigate some of this? So what I'm going to do is list some actions that increase the surface roughness of the soil to slow the water movement and improve infiltration to reduce erosion and sedimentation in targeted areas. And that's important, in targeted areas. You're not going to be able to treat all of your property most likely, but you want to target the most severely affected. So these list of things here, if it'll come up. It seems to be frozen. Well, Carrie, I can't seem to advance this.
Okay, phew. It was hard for me to unmute myself because we both had control of the mouse. So when you moved, I moved. But it is advancing, Steve. I see it's now fast forwarded to mitigation measures, erosion control, and matting. Do you want me to step it back just a
let's
slide?
step it back. I can't see it.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's see here.
So let's step it back to where I list aerial, ground seeding, mulch only, that list.
So I have, what mitigation measures can you take? Aerial and ground seeding of native grass.
Yep.
Mulch only. And Tiffany, can you confirm that you can see the slide, please?
It looks like we're having some issues. I'm seeing the slide, what mitigation measures can you take? And then it's just the first bullet point. It looks like some of our participants are seeing a blank screen.
So I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna share again, and I'm just gonna keep control of the remote here. So hold on, bear with us, technical difficulties. It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar without. Okay, let's see here. and share. How are we looking?
Hasn't come up yet.
Nope.
Give it a sec. Nope.
Okay.
I try it again, Carrie.
Okay, I'm just gonna pause just a minute and be patient. This happened yesterday. It just lagged a little bit and then all of a sudden it popped up just as I was about to stop sharing. Anything yet?
No.
No.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. And I'm gonna actually thank you for your patience. And I'm gonna try screen 2, share. Anything?
No.
No.
Oh, shoot.
You want me to share? Try mine again?
Sure. Sorry about that, everybody. Just 1 second here while we. Oh, there. Now
There we
you're
go.
sharing.
See that?
That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect.
All
Tag
right.
team
Yeah.
here. Okay.
That's great. Okay, so we're back on track. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about several treatments here. I think the first 4 or 5 here are potentially fundable because the immediate need is to reduce erosion that could occur starting now as the wet weather comes in. And so we'll talk about, I just want to show these to you and talk a little bit about their effectiveness. So seeding. So this has been done for quite a bit of time in post-fire environments. Research has shown that seeding is minimal to very marginal in its effect because in most cases you start seeding in the fall, the seed hasn't germinated and a lot of times it's washed away. However, seeding can be improved by covering or matching it up with mulch. And the photo on the right shows some hydromulching on a burned slope. Hydromulching is better than no mulching, although it is not as effective as some of the other mulching here I'm going to show in a minute. Seeding with natives is better than seeding with non-native grasses and forbs, because the non-natives suppress the regeneration and juvenile growth of the native vegetation. However, it's sometimes hard to get and it's a little bit more expensive. Mulching, studies have shown that mulching with wood chips or shredded type of wood, like on the lower left, or straw, weed-free straw would be best at about 2 tons to the acre, is effective at reducing that erosion right off. And of course, if this combined with some kind of appropriate seeding, that can assist that as well. There's a number of different erosion control matting that is used on steep slopes. And so these are either like a cloth, or here, this is jute and it's biodegradable. And it's kind of like a very, very heavy type of cheesecloth, and it can last several years and it breaks down. Some of these are made with coconut shell strands as well. But these work very well on steep slopes, and if it's seeded underneath, this helps prevent that raindrop impact and reduce the potential of moving soil down slope. And the upper photo on the right is just above a home, and so this is a bit more expensive, but when you have a high value target like a home, this may be well worth the time and effort and money to do so. There's also these log erosion barriers that can be put in on steeper slopes, actually utilizing burn trees on site, where they're cut into lengths and countersunk into the soil a little bit and held in place behind stumps. And what this does, if you look at the photo on the right, it's kind of sunk into the soil, and then the soil is dug around it to break up that hydrophobic layer if there is one. And as water and soil move down slope, it's trapped behind these log barriers. The steeper the slope, the more tightly spaced the log barriers need to be. You know, having only one or two or one row of log barriers at the bottom is not going to be enough because it will be overwhelmed. You have to have a series of these to capture some of that, that potential erosion on bare soils. Another mitigation measure that is quite popular and easy to do are using what we call contour wattles. These are filled with straw. They're countersunk into the soil a few inches, and then they're staked to hold them down so they don't get washed away, or water that goes underneath it and creates a gully. These can be put out really quickly, and it's something you can do yourself. They're only good though on gentle to moderate slopes. So anything probably greater than 30% slope, these are probably not the mitigation measure you want to use. And again, you can see on these slopes, you know, putting one is not going to be enough on a very long slope like you see with the gentleman putting the stake in. There's several back in the background. Silt fences. Same thing is that these can be effective on gentle to moderate slopes, probably less than 30%. You see one on the left in the forest. The one on the right is near a home, and so that's a high value target. And so having a series of these can reduce sedimentation on your property and help hold that in place. And I think a lot of us have seen straw bales used to trap sediment. These have to be anchored so they don't get washed away. Typically, you don't, in the past, if you saw them, this is not a perennial stream, this is a ephemeral stream, but because of the burned watershed, all of a sudden now that stream has come alive. And so having a series of these is important to trap sedimentation behind them. And the two slides down below show the sediment that's been trapped and the vegetation that now is colonizing that sediment behind that hay bale, or straw bale, sorry. And here's a homeowner up on the Sandy M Canyon that just did this. I found this on our land stewards Facebook page. The property, the home burned. It is right next to the river, and you can see a steep slope. And they have placed hay bales here to prevent erosion from going down into the river. And I believe they also did some seeding around this property as well. So if a significant amount of the watershed above your property has burned, you can expect increased water flow. And if you have existing roads, dirt roads that have culverts, you will probably want to inspect them fairly regularly after rain events so that they do not plug up, because you can expect some sediment to move down slope and potentially fill in the basin in front of your, on the uphill side of your culvert. Of course, the whole culvert can get plugged, and it's very, very difficult to unplug these. A lot of time consuming, and a lot of times a shovel won't be able to reach all the way through. There are some devices that can be put on the upper end of the culvert to allow sediment to deposit but not plug the culvert like you see on the right. You might be able to construct these yourself. I think this was a product that I found on the internet. In some cases where there's a large amount of the watershed burned and burned severely, is that you can expect an increase of flow over the next several years. And so perhaps a culvert replacement to an increased size may be needed to accommodate that increased flow. And this is particularly true in watersheds that have snowpack that is now exposed to the to the sun, and you can often get these intense melting events that can overwhelm a culvert. So anyway, this is an engineering practice, and this probably is not covered currently. And also because if there's fish in the stream, you also have to go through a permitting process through ODF. And so that becomes more complicated. But the big thing is maintaining your drainage ditches and your culverts. So let me switch now and talk a little bit about assessing injury to trees, damage to trees, and talk a little bit about salvage potential. So here's a Douglas fir forest that has burned, and just to calibrate your eye, although a lot of the trees here are dead and a few are alive, we would categorize this as a moderate severity because most of the trees still have their needles, although they're scorched and they're dropping on the ground. If you look at the needles on the ground, that is a great mulch to help protect from that raindrop splash and erosion that can occur. And so in these situations, this is helping tremendously. But when we look at injury to trees, and we're going to have a more in-depth webinar just on this topic, is we look at the crown scorch, or the damage from direct heat or direct flame or heat to the foliage and buds. And so here's a tree that lost probably 90% of its original green crown. It only has like 10% left. Here's another one that probably lost a third of its crown. The bottom part you can see, where you can see some brown needles down below. Also the bole or trunk char, the higher up this char is, and if it's on all four sides, the more severe effect it has on the tree. And even the char at the base of the tree, or at the root collar, at the soil line, is important to take a look at. You can have trees that have very little crown scorch or bole scorch, but they could have some fairly deep root char or root collar char that essentially kills the cambium and will kill the tree despite even having a good crown. A lot of this depends on species. So this tree here in the foreground is a hemlock, and you can see hemlock has very thin bark. Even though this tree does not have much char up above on the trunk, and it probably has very little crown scorch, this tree is physiologically dead. And so this would be a tree you might want to look at to salvage its value. So other factors that can affect this, of course, I mentioned species. What was the health or the vigor of the tree prior to the fire? If it was poor vigor before and it's been injured by fire, that may be a tree that you might select to be removed. Bark beetles, right now it's too early for bark beetles, but come spring, we might see Douglas fir bark beetle, and later on in ponderosa pine, mountain pine beetle if you live in central or eastern Oregon later next summer. And of course, drought. The drought either before the fire or drought after can affect the survivability of trees. And to sum up, so in thinking about the survivability of trees, and if you do an assessment of your trees and find that you have a fair amount that are likely not to make it, is that do you have really enough volume timber volume to harvest and to have a logger come in to be able to remove those trees and capture their value before insects and disease begin to degrade the value of the logs. A couple of things to note here, of course, on economics is that you know, the log price determines the value of the trees, and right now log prices are pretty good for Douglas fir, and that's a good thing. But the other part is logging costs. What does it cost? You see a machine in here to remove, to cut, remove, and truck these logs to the mill. right now, assuming the logs aren't super degraded, is that and how much volume you have, you could not only pay for the logging, but make some income as well. But all of that depends on how much volume of timber you have to sell. And the other thing is, it's important, how quickly can you salvage those logs before they lose value? I can tell you right now that logging contractors are going to be very hard to find. In the this last round of wildfires, 45 logging sites or logging operation were lost in the fire. And so that really hurts our capability to be able to harvest timber in a timely way, because now what logging operators are left, they're in high demand. And so you could have a significant delay from now till when you could line up a logger to come and remove your trees. And so between now and when that occurs, you can have decay, reduce the value of your trees, and affect the economic viability of a harvest operation. So that's is the logger available. So the other thing would be, depending on your objectives for your land, is what do you have wildlife considerations. And so here's a stand that's been marked with some trees to be retained, in this case for cavity nesting woodpeckers that create habitat for a whole variety of other wildlife. And so you might want to think about that. And some best ways to do that is to leave trees in clumps or larger areas that both from a safety perspective as well as from a logging perspective, to keep machines away from dead trees, because they represent a safety hazard. But leaving some of these areas there for wildlife is shown to be really important, and this can create what we call an early cereal habitat patch, and we'll talk more about that in the subsequent webinar. But I wanted to have you think about, if wildlife is important to you, to think about it up front. And then finally, if you harvest trees in a commercial salvage harvest operation, you're gonna have to think about reforestation. You're required to replant after an operation like this. Seedlings will be tight. Right now, this year, seedlings have already been spoken for, and in the next couple of years, hopefully nurseries can ramp up and increase the production of seedlings, but you may have to get in line to and order those ahead of time to make sure that you will have them when you're ready to reforest your property. And we will have a webinar on post-fire reforestation. And so I'm going to finish up here. There's a couple of resources I put on our website about how to install that jute netting, and also one on wildlife, how to accommodate wildlife in a burned landscape. And so we'll take your questions now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve, for that presentation. We do already have questions coming through into the Q&A, so I'm going to dive right in here. We'll have about a little over 10 minutes to work through some of these. So Steve is wondering, what are the natural mechanisms that reduce hydrio? And I'm not familiar with that term, but it's HYDRIO. What are the natural mechanisms that reduce hydrio?
Is he talking about maybe the hydrophobic soils?
Yeah, perhaps. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the soils can remain hydrophobic for months or even a few years. Usually it begins to break down over at least the first year, depending on how severe it is. Some of the things that break it down, actually mechanical activity can help break it down. That may not be natural, but soil critters burrowing into the soil, breaking up some of that. Freeze and thaw can help break up that hydrophobic soil. So, yeah.
Yeah, usually a good frost will break it up if you're in an area that has a frost.
And then Steve or Daniel, have you heard of it, insurance helping to pay for post-fire erosion mitigation practices? And we might be getting into this in a little bit later with the agency updates.
Yeah, I think the agency folks, I don't know about insurance, but I would talk well, you could talk to your insurance agent just to see what kind of damage if you to your property, maybe more around your home, that kind of damage, property damage to your home. There, I don't know. I would explore that though with your own insurance carrier and see. But for the other types of things, the panel that we're going to have here will have comments on financial assistance.
Well, and it does depend on the insurance policy you have too, but it also depends, and hopefully one of our specialists will address this later, but if the particular fire was declared a catastrophic event, there could be some funding by FEMA, but again, it's got to be prioritized, and hopefully it'll be mapped out and considered for funding, whether you're in that declaration, the catastrophic declaration or not, and if FEMA or other carriers would cover that.
Right. And then we have a question going back to erosion. Do you have average costs per acre for erosion treatments?
The panelists, the NRCS will have some of those. They fund only up to a certain amount, but it's highly variable from maybe a few $100 per acre till several $100s per acre, depending on the mitigation treatment.
And if it's an approved activity, and our NRCS folks will be able to answer it much better, but there is an estimated cost per activity. And then it's a matter, like Steve said, cost share, but they do have costs written up for different activities.
Great. And just a reminder, if you do have a question related to the presentation, to please type that into the Q&A. That's where we're tracking the questions and where your question will get read out loud. Next up, we have Stephanie is asking, does the mulch intended to prevent erosion create potential issues as ground fuel in future fires?
That's a good question.
Well, they certainly have, from seeding exotic grasses and creating a hayfield out there, you know, as it grows, that's been a problem. Actually, though, there's a difference here with the mulch. So, so when you think about fuels, the mulch here is compacted, or well, I mean, it's not fluffy. It has a lot of air in it. It's against the soil. Soil's a little bit more moist. It would be no more fuel than your normal needle organic layer. And so if you were to get a fire in there, it might carry, but remember, that's only going to last for a year or two, and it starts to degrade, and hopefully everything else begins to regenerate and rejuvenate with other vegetation to take over. So no, I would not be worried about it from a fuel perspective. It's too little to really create that kind of a thing. You really got the fuel, unfortunately, you got the fuel treatment from the wildfire.
Yeah, and then Susan is adding to Stephanie's question, does mulch that is put down on steep or even gentle river banks that will definitely be covered by rushing water in the wintertime add unnecessary nutrients to the water? Will it really help hold soil in place, or will it just wash away in our typical wintertime high water events? Would stake down erosion control mats or log erosion barriers work better in these steep riverbank situations?
I probably wouldn't put any in the high water mark anyway to begin with. So I probably would not use mats down there either, because they'll get washed away, and that's a huge expense that would essentially be washed away in a big freshet. So I would stay clear of that high or flood mark on the stream bank.
Mm-hmm. And then Is there a general guideline of how long logs will be good before decay sets in, like a time range?
Assuming for like salvage. So one of the things that you can look at for, it depends on species. So for like Douglas fir, it doesn't rot very quickly. And so you might lose 5 or 10% in year 2 or 3. And so if you have some pretty good sized trees, you still have substantial value still there. Other species like that are thin bark or are less rot resistant, like grand fir, western hemlock, spruce, they probably would have significantly more decay in them after year 2 or 3. And so you might want to reassess their value at that time, depending on when you can get to it. So, yeah.
My experience has been, and again, like Steve said, depending on the species, but, you know, given everything, sooner the better, knowing full well what's going on. But normally, rule of thumb, you know, after the second season, that it's going to start checking, the wood will start checking and losing value. Some species right after the first winter, but after two years, it's not much value is left usually.
When he says checking, that is the log starts, the tree begins getting splits in it. And so that's, the tree may not even have decay in it, but if it splits, then that reduces its value.
That's been my experience. So given everything, sooner the better.
Next question here. This person has a stand of 15-year-old reprod, which was totally destroyed, but the trees are still standing. Is it best to slash and burn what is remaining before planting, or can we plant right through it?
How dense is it?
That's,
Do they say how dense it is, Carrie?
They did not.
so that's a really good question. It's one of those that's it's in between. It's not quite merchantable to be able to salvage anything, and yet it's still big enough to cause a real problem, you know, from a work perspective. You could underplant it, assuming, you know, there's going to be enough light, but then over time, all that material is going to fall. And I'm not worried about it falling on seedlings. What it does is it builds up fuel. And so now you have a mat of fuel that's going to take a long time for it to decay. And so that's a really tough situation. I wish I had I'd have to, as Daniel said, we'd have to look to really see how dense it was. I have seen some places with Douglas fir where it's not very dense, where it burned. The trees it's about 15 years old, and I would have underplanted it. And then there's other places where it's so dense that I probably would not, and we'd have to figure out how to chip all that material and move it off site and then replant it.
Really depends. If they could clarify that, maybe we could answer that later on.
Okay.
It'd be great. I'd love to see some pictures of that if you're willing to send us that to kind of take a closer look at it.
Yeah.
I think you somewhat answered this, but what techniques are recommended to reduce the fire risk in a plantation?
Good question. So a couple things. One is thinning, and thinning probably wider than you normally thin to, you know, if you're just after timber production. I would thin, if you have a road next to it, I would thin it wider on the below side of the road and above it to use the road and create more of a fuel break. And when you thin it, if you leave your best trees, that is your bigger trees, they have higher crowns. The big thing is you want to get rid of trees that have crowns that are low to the ground, because that's like a ladder that goes up. You could, in addition, prune the trees on the edge that have branches that are low down to increase the distance from the surface up to the crown of the trees. Over time, if you keep thinning it and leaving your bigger, best trees, that improves its fire resistance over time. And the species, if you're talking about Douglas fir, and that's the only species, but on the east side where you may have other species, leaving pine and larch, trees that have thick bark are more fire resistant than things like grand fir, lodgepole pine. And on the west side, hemlock and grand fir have thin bark. So so species density, and also probably treating some of that slash from a thinning a little bit better. Normally we don't have to treat slash in a thinning, but if you're trying to improve fire resistance and reduce the surface fuel, you can do that, particularly adjacent to your roads, and utilize that road as a strategic fuel fire break.
And that's really good practice, is a shaded fuel break on adjacent to roads. It's done quite a bit, especially on the west side, where if you thin it to the crown touch, you actually, and then concentrate on reducing the fuels on the surface of the ground. Shaded fuel breaks look good, and they reduce fuel adjacent to roads for any evac or transport purpose. It's a really good thing to do.
The other thing, I also manage the OSU Research Forest, and one of the things that we've been doing is, let's say you have a plantation and then you have, one of your roads go through it. I remove all the roadside trees within 10 feet. And what that does is it creates separation in the crown above, so that, because over time, those crowns on either side of the road are going to be touching. And so a fire on one side of the road can easily jump to the other. But as you thin your plantations, and if you have a road, take out the roadside trees, and that will also lift the crowns up.
Great, that's fantastic. And we have so many more questions, and we'll do our best to try to get to those questions. Steve and Daniel, I don't know if you have access to the Q&A, but if you could take a look at some of those questions and try to type your answers into the Q&A, that would be helpful to try to get through some of those, because right now I want to transition to our agency partners who have all rallied to come online today and talk with us. And so welcome. And we're just going to kick it right off with Oregon Department of Forestry and Ryan Gordon. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie, and good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to join today. Again, my name is Ryan Gordon, and I'm the Family Forest Land Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Forestry. And if you're joining today because your land's been burned or you lost your home, I know this is an especially heavy and important topic. And we've been asked to talk a little bit about some of the different assistance programs, both technical and financial, that are available. But as I've been kind of thinking about this and trying to scribble some notes out for myself, I think maybe at this point, one of the best things I can do is try to share a little bit of perspective about the road ahead as we start to look at opportunities for post-fire restoration and recovery statewide. And so I'm kind of got a bullet list that I'm going to run through here and hopefully kick off the conversation with some of the other folks who follow me. The first thing that I wanted to say is that ODF and our partners are still really actively engaged in fire response right now. Even though most of the fires, or I would say all the fires that are currently on the landscape are really unlikely to grow or move, there's still a lot of work to do there. And that's, really focused on continuing to secure fire lines, but also includes addressing safety hazards so that transportation corridors can open, utilities can be restored, and people can ultimately return to their homes and property. And so we as an agency still have a pretty big investment there, and a lot of our folks are still engaged in that work. I also wanted to put a little prevention message out there. We're still in fire season. We got some good precipitation around large parts of the state late last month, and that was really helpful to a lot of the fire suppression efforts. But there are still some parts of the state that are in high or extreme fire danger. And I would encourage folks to either go to the ODF website or connect with their local ODF field office to get the latest information about fire season and fire conditions. So kind of transitioning now more to that conversation about assistance, technical and financial. One of the things that's really great here in Oregon is that we have a wonderful network of agencies and organizations at all levels that are there to help landowners, forest landowners. And a lot of them are represented here on this webinar today. And all the work that we do at ODF leverages these partnerships and a lot of federal funding that we get from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and also the Farm Services Agency. And I think, the task before us is pretty large. And it's important to remember that the resources are going to be stretched thin, especially in the near term, while we're still engaged in fire response and while we're also trying to kind of evaluate at a landscape scale the impacts of these fires. So while there are programs that are immediately available to assist some landowners, and we're going to hear about those when we listen to NRCS and to the Farm Service Agency, there are others that may take some time to ramp up. And it's also very likely that there are additional avenues of assistance that will become available in the weeks or months ahead. There's really a lot still that we don't know, a lot for us to learn. But there is a lot of collaboration that's happening statewide right now to try to sort all of that out. There are some parallel efforts, and a group of us are trying to connect the dots there and really try to make sure that we're all working together to help answer those questions and get the information that we need to move forward as quickly as possible. And from that perspective too, I think we know that it's really important to address a lot of these resource impacts as soon as possible, but it's also important that we're really deliberate and thoughtful. And we've already heard some conversation here on this webinar about some of the work that's underway to try to assess severity and develop some mapping and some different tools. There's a few parallel efforts there, and I'll be working with some folks here in the next week or two to try to connect those dots and bring those together. And I know that the extension program is looking to create some tools that would be available online for folks to be able to access information around their property. But again, I think I want to underscore the importance of being kind of slow and deliberate. We know that resources are going to be limited, and it's going to be really important to prioritize our work and take a landscape scale approach to where we're making those investments so that we can address the highest need and recognize that at the end of the day, this is a long-term project. We're going to be working on this for years, and it's going to serve us well to build the best and sort of deepest toolbox that we can up front. We're also going to face some challenges, and Steve's actually already outlined some of those, as we move forward. When I think about post-fire restoration, seed and seedling availability is really going to be, I think, a bottleneck for us, as is capacity in the contracting and consulting communities. And it's going to take the work of all the partners here and others around the state to tackle some of those challenges and work through them. But I know that we will do our best to address them as they arise. I also wanted to highlight that there's a lot of important connections to the Oregon Forest Practices Act for some of the work that lies ahead, including salvage logging. And again, Steve talked about that a little bit. And I know that future sessions will go in, this webinar series will go into more detail on some of that, but I just wanted to call that out for folks up front and encourage you to visit ODF's website or see the materials that are available with this webinar for some more detail about some of that. I noticed too, there was a question, I think, in the chat box here about recommendations for contractors and consultants, and I just wanted to let folks know that ODF field offices do maintain lists of local contractors and consultants, and so that's one potential resource to access, recognizing, of course, that a lot of folks are going to be looking for those services. So to kind of wrap things together and wrap up here so that we don't get too far behind schedule, I want to highlight on our website, we do have a Find a Forester tool that allows you to go in there and map your location and click and get the contact information for your local stewardship forester, recognizing that those folks are going to be pretty busy. But we're certainly here and available to help with technical assistance and to help answer questions related to the Oregon Forest Practices Act. So how do you get started? That's often an overwhelming question, even under normal conditions, and we're not operating under those conditions right now. But I would give the same advice that I always give, which is to reach out to someone local who you know and trust. It might be a stewardship forester, an OSU extension forester, someone with a local watershed council or a soil and water conservation district, or even a neighbor who's plugged into some of those channels and can help make some introductions and help you to start networking. And also, I think as we proceed, there's likely to be some different forums that continue to develop around the state and locally to help put you in touch with resources. And I know that's a little bit more challenging with some of the COVID considerations that we have right now, but I'm sure we'll be looking to some virtual formats and other ways of connecting people locally. So wrapping up, NRCS and the Farm Service Agency are going to follow me here. They're going to highlight a couple of programs that are available for post-fire restoration. And I just wanted to say that, you know, we partner with both NRCS and FSA to help them deliver those programs, and look forward to doing that in the coming months and years. And again, just stay tuned. More resources will come available. So thank you.
Perfect, Ryan. Thank you so much. With the Farm Service Agency, we have Heather Tritt. And Heather, when you're ready.
Okay, can you see me?
I can.
Okay, so I'm Heather Tritt from Farm Service Agency. I cover the counties of Linn, Benton, and Lincoln and Lane counties. So we have quite a few fires amongst us in those 4 counties. And basically, I'm going to touch base on 5 of our main programs that we have that really kind of look at getting the land back up and running for post wildfires. So our first 2 programs, it's called the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, or we always acronym everything. So it's the EFRP program. And that is for owners of non-industrial forest land. So you have to be kind of a private landowner on that. And then also the Emergency Conservation Program, or ECP. So both of those are right there for landowners. The ECP focuses on the cropland and the pasture land, where the EFRP is really just in the timber. So it's very similar. The practices that we can look at cost sharing for is debris removal, site prep for the forest replantings, the cost of the trees, the labor of planting those trees, and also tubes for wildlife protection. We can also look at doing fencing, so replacing of livestock fencing that are in the timber or also down in the pasture land and the cropland. So our cost share rates are 75% cost share, and we also have not to exceed rates. So those are kind of like a cap on the funding because these funds are limited and we have budgets for all of this stuff. For this program, the sign up period is pending. As Ryan kind of said, you know, we're waiting kind of until that fire gets put out, then we can get good assessments on the ground. Once we get those good assessments and people know what they need, then they will apply based on their needs. So we're definitely working with ODS and NRCS and multiple partners on trying to figure out who is eligible, how much need is needed, and getting the funding allocated for that. So projected sign-up for those programs are going to be November, December, based on, you know, getting assessments done and getting boots on the ground, and then getting people into our offices. So stay tuned for that. We'll be posting that and getting that out too. Then we also have a tree assistance program, or TAP for short. So this is for orchardists and nursery growers. This is for any trees, bushes, or vines. So this is more in the cropland aspect of things. So the practices are replacement, replanting, and or rehabbing trees, bushes, and vines. So that is also a cost share, and it also does have not to exceed rates on that. The cost share percentages are based on what kind of practices you are actually putting in. The key on this is the notice of loss has to be filed within 90 days of the loss event. So that is kind of a time constraint on sometimes on that. So just keep that in mind. The best thing is just call your office, get it documented, and then we'll go from there. So we have several different livestock programs. We have actually 3 different livestock programs that in one way or another can help. Our first one is the Livestock Indemnity Program, or LIP. This is for loss of commercial livestock due to the wildfires. So animals, you know, unfortunately sometimes get trapped. This really helps at getting assistance and compensation for those livestock that were lost. The key here is you must have some sort of acceptable proof of death. So if you do have an animal that has been dead or has been lost in the fire, we're going to need pictures. We're going to need, you know, some good documentation on what happened there. And then that notice of loss has to be filed within 30 days of the loss event or whenever it is apparent. So as soon as you know, contact your local office. Then we have the emergency assistance for livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. So that is the ELAP program for short. That looks at several different ways we can look at payments and eligibility on that. We've got feed losses, so that's going to be anything like a haystack that was burned or any kind of feed stuff that was lost due to fire. That's going to be part of the program. We have grazing losses, so this program covers like burned pastures. This is on private land. Another one of our programs that I'll touch base with covers when it's on federal property, but this one covers private. And then we also have water hauling. Water hauling, it looks at what is normal water hauling and what has the wildfire contributed to result in some water hauling that is not normal practice. This notice of loss has to be within 30 days also, so it's really key to get in touch with your office. Then we have the livestock forage program. This looks at grazing losses on burnt federal lands. So we look at stuff on that. And then we also have the livestock forage program also is a drought-based program. And right now, a lot of counties in the Willamette Valley are eligible for drought payment just on grazing land currently. So there's a couple of different aspects you can do on that. So we are actively taking sign up for the drought program. So if you have livestock, you could be eligible for a payment on that. The deadline on that is January 30th. So we have some time, but I'd always encourage people, please don't wait until January 29th to give us a call. So that's our main kind of tools in our toolbox to get started on wildfire assistance. So just a couple of little tidbits like producer steps, like what can you do before you call your office? I say pictures, pictures, pictures. Like you can never take too many pictures because like Ryan said, we are limited. So if you can take pictures, that will help us out so very much, and take a good variety of pictures. If you have a burned up fence, you know, take a picture of several different angles so we can see it, because there's just no way, like Farm Service Agency, we can't get out to everybody at one time. So take tons of pictures, and like they said, take assessments of your property. So then when you do apply, you know roughly how many acres have burned. Like, are you going to need to replant? Are you going to need debris removal? You know, what practices are you looking for assistance? And having that assessment will go a long, long ways while we're doing your application. And it also goes for livestock, so keep a good record of all of that stuff. The key too is always stay in touch with your local FSA office. So we have what's called the USDA Service Center Locator. So if you just Google USDA Service Center Locator, you can select your county, and then it'll tell you exactly who you need to call. So all these notice of losses, you can quickly do that, send off an email, or just pick up the phone, give us a quick phone call, and we can take that notice of loss right over the phone or right over an email. So those are really time constrained, you know, get those done. Another thing is a lot of customers, since we don't have a lot of forestry programs, a lot of you guys will be new to our system. So if you can have any way to identify your land, whether it's just like your tax statement that has your land, like township range and section and the tax lot, something simple like that, or mapping like they were saying on your assessments, something that helps us find your land that much quicker, because we will be under huge sign up numbers. So just every little bit will help us a lot. And then the most thing too is I always say, please be patient with us. Like, we are working hard to assist you guys, and you guys are our number one, but you know, we have to do a lot of things in the background and to get these things going. So just be patient with us. And then one more program that we're currently taking, because I know the coronavirus has had huge effects on the ag community. So we have, it is called Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. So we just rolled out with 2.0. You can go easily on to www.farmers.gov, and right on there you can look up all of your crops and see if they're eligible for assistance. If they're eligible for assistance, give us a call and we'll get you signed up for that program too, to help you through the coronavirus effects that have happened. So those are our main programs. We have 23 county offices in Oregon, so you know, each office, some of them, you know, cover multiple counties, or you can be like me, I got 4 counties. So just go to that USDA locator and you'll definitely make connections with who you need to, and then we'll be able to assist you with any of these programs.
Excellent, Heather, thank you so much. And just so you all don't panic, because this is a lot of information, again, we'll put it on our website. I have already some of it there, the contact information. I'm going to be working tonight and tomorrow morning to get that updated. And so give me maybe half a day to get you the video and all the resources, but we'll get that to you. Thank you so much, Heather. So next up, yes, we have another Heather from NRCS. So Heather, when you're ready. Oh, and sorry, just apologies. Just one quick announcement that Steve and Daniel have been working since they ended their presentation to answer your questions in the Q&A. So if you did not hear your question being answered, go ahead and check out that Q&A. And so I simply just click on Q&A and I go to the answered, and you can search out your question or look at other people's question and answer. But I'm hoping that Zoom records those for me and that I can somehow display that as well on the website. So fingers crossed on that. Okay, Heather, go ahead.
All right. I am trying to share my screen and trying to find my presentation. Let's see. Oh, my windows. Oh, here it is. Beginning. All right. So I am Heather Medina Associate. I'm with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we are definitely here to serve you and address any assistance that you need due to the fires. So we do provide some technical assistance and financial assistance. We have offices in most of the counties, and definitely we are here to serve you. So feel free to contact our offices. It is your tax dollars at work. These are all of the Oregon field offices, and as Heather said, they are service centers. So NRCS is co-located with Farm Service Agency, and so here you'll see where most of the offices are and of our coverage. We have given Carrie our handouts, and there are some handouts with our contact information for our service centers. Here's the NRCS offices where you can reach for assistance. Again, that's either technical assistance or financial assistance as well. We are having a sign up. Oh, I forget. Trying to stay on my time, Andrew. So I am talking about the financial assistance, and Andrew Owen will be talking about the technical assistance related to forestry after I'm done. So we are having our environmental quality incentives program. We will have an emergency sign up for the whole state. This flyer is specific to Western Oregon. And so for the whole state, it is October 30th and December 30th. For Western Oregon, the conservation practices that we will be addressing are conservation cover crop, woody residue treatment, and mulching. So our primary concern that we're looking at is erosion. We know there's a lot of other concerns out there, but that's the area that we are focusing on as a state for our emergency response. It is extremely important to, as soon as you're interested in working with NRCS, either contact our field offices, our local district conservationist, and then also working with our partners such as Farm Service Agency, because they do enter you into their system. For our fire assistance, we are focusing on the FEMA, the FMEG fires. And so that's where you see those red dots. That is our focus area for these two sign-ups for the October 30th and December 30th. Those are our priority areas. So if you have been affected by those fires in those declared areas, that is where we are focusing on. Here, I will send Carrie this application. And so this is our application phase. It's called a 1200, and you would just be filling that out. I do understand it's, we're in a new fiscal year. We'll just use this form as we do not have the current form right now. And let me just go over some. So it's really important when you're coming in, as Heather Tritt stated, to develop a, taking some pictures, and Daniel had also stated in his presentation, looking at a rapid assessment. If you can take that Oregon State Extension rapid assessment that has been developed in coordination with NRCS, Andrew Owen, and that would be really helpful to look at those paperwork, look at your site before you come in and see what your exact needs are, how many acres, your location, do you have erosion concerns, how many acres you project of tree damage. And so we are, the EQIP program is available for private landowners, non-industrial private timberlands, and for agriculture lands as well. Let's see, we will be having, going back to our EQIP program, we will be offering early start waivers. And so as a landowner coming in, working with your NRCS office, it is extremely important. If you're interested in commencing right away, you need to have the proper paperwork in line. So we would have to work with your local office to create an early start waiver that does get sent up to the state conservationist and need for approval. We also need to, I know everybody's really eager to start taking some action right away, but if you want any assistance, we cannot have any areas that are commencing ahead of time. We do have, with our financial assistance, you do have to, we will write a conservation plan, as Daniel had stated, and that will have some conservation practices that will have to meet our standards and specifications. So it's really extremely important that you don't commence anything ahead of time, that you work in conjunction with your NRCS office and work through that process, that early start waivers, and then the contracting process for a contract or an agreement. The other program that we do have available also, and I'm trying to hurry up, is the Emergency Watershed Program. And this is for areas that have been affected by wildfire. If there's imminent threat to your house or household or lives, please contact our state office in Portland, Molly. Our state engineer is that contact for that program. You can also contact your local district conservationist as well, and he can put you in touch with our offices. So stormwater conservation districts, tribes, watershed councils, local cities can apply for this. There is a 25% funding. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Andrew.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just gonna briefly touch on the 4 practices that Heather just mentioned, just to give a little bit more reference to how they can be deployed. So as Daniel and Stephen talked about earlier, there's a number of different scenarios that we're going to be assessing. Each scenario may take a little bit different approach. So to start with, again, like Heather said, we're really focused on what we can offer immediately. How do we keep the soil on the mountain, if you will? So we're really focused on that immediate, what we're kind of framing as the 0 to 1 year efforts that we can do, understanding that restoration efforts are going to come, and there's going to be other resources that are going to be available for more of the restoration efforts. So to start with, I was going to touch on what you'll probably hear called conservation cover. The idea of conservation cover, it is an effort to reduce sheet and rill wind erosion and sedimentation getting into stream sides. So that's the idea behind that one. And there's many different techniques that can be used under conservation cover, but the idea is to establish and maintain more permanent vegetation. We're also going to be offering a cover crop scenario where grasses, legumes, forbs, and other plants can be established for more seasonal vegetation cover. And you may find a variety of applying different practices across a large landscape, or even on one property. You may find it suitable to do a cover crop and also apply a conservation cover to the same properties. So as our district conservationists and planners and folks are out there on the ground assisting you, they'll know how to apply each of these practices in the right location for the greatest effect. We went through a great presentation on the different mulching. We have a practice called mulching. It's got everything from using straw hay bales to more specific types for steep slopes, where we can use some of the jute matting and other more artificial material. Again, depending on the situation, depending on the assessment, we've got a number of different mulching practices. And then finally, one of the other practices, it's called woody residue treatment, but in this case, we're using it through an emergency clause for hazard tree removal. So if you've got large, for that matter, any size trees that are going to pose a threat to a house that could fall on a roadway, a trailhead, a trail, if they're within a certain proximity to a river or a stream, the idea behind the woody biomass removal is that we can get those safely on the ground before the restoration, before we start pursuing more restoration efforts. We don't want folks on the ground working, doing reseeding, planting, other mulching efforts if we've got overhead hazards that we're going to be worried about. So all of these practices can be used in unison with each other. We may determine that just one practice at a time is the best. But really, it's that really rapid response, deploying these resources rapidly in the counties that Heather demonstrated to try and get the greatest impact for soil stability within the shortest period of time. You'll see a little bit of variation between the east side of the state and the west side of the state. We're offering a couple different practices on the east side of the state where some more traditional range land was impacted by fire. So there are some range planting practices, and there's also herbaceous weed treatments that we're focusing on. Early detection, rapid response of the invasive species that you'll see occupying an area after a disturbance. So as you look at our website, make sure that we're finding the right location, you're looking at the right geography, and we can tease out the right practices that'll be available within your area. So I know that was brief. I didn't want to get too into the weeds on each of the practices that we do offer. There's quite a large range of cost share funding. It goes from anywhere from about 5 cents a square foot, depending on the type of product that you're using, all the way up to $800 to $900 an acre, depending on the practice and the suite of practices that we use. So it's kind of hard to drill down without doing assessments on the per acre or per property basis to see exactly what you need. But there is cost share available. It's going to range, and we'll try and match the right practice and the right cost share to the resource concerns that we're focused on your property. I also think it's really important to say it over and over and over. I was out doing assessments yesterday. The smoke's out of the air, the fire's out of the trees, but there's really a lot of danger still in those forests. So if you look at a lot of the common denominators to injury and fatalities during fire, a lot of that happens post-wildfire as we're back in doing assessments. So I can't stress enough to look up, look down, look around. We're going to have our heads down looking at erosion, looking at the herbaceous understory. So make sure we go out there prepared with situational awareness. I couldn't have said it better than Daniel, but I think it's worth repeating multiple times, and really having high situational awareness before we head in the forest, do an assessment. So thank you for the time, and Carrie, thank you for putting this on. Really great presentation.
Thank you, Andrew and Heather from NRCS. And Andrew, you're absolutely right. We really need to focus on our situational awareness and our safety. So up next, we have with us Eric Nussbaum. He's from the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Eric?
Right. Thank you. As we said, I'm Eric Nussbaum with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I'm here mostly to talk about our local partners, soil and water conservation districts. You've heard them mentioned a few times. They are partners with all the different agencies that have talked today, especially the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Services Agency, and OWEB. They're able to help with assessments and connecting you with the different types of financial resources, especially since some of you folks may need to get financial resources from both state and federal partners. So they can help you coordinate that. They can also help you if there's any grant writing, sometimes do projects on the ground. They're just a great resource that we want to make sure that you tap into. They can not only help with unforested land, but also agricultural lands, of course, and even the small rural residential landowners, which may not have big agriculture or big forests, but do have some issues from the fires. So I'm here just to urge you to contact them. We do have some resources on our website. It's really easy to find. It's oregon.gov/ODA. You can find a list of your local soil and water conservation districts on there. And you can also find a resource page. We have a big link at the top of the page for about caring for animals, if you happen to have animal mortality and what to do with the carcasses and some other things. As well as if you just want to Google your county name and SWCD, you can generally find your local soil and water conservation district. And so that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Eric. And then finally, we have with us Courtney Schaff from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. Courtney?
There we go. Hi, everybody. And it was great to hear all these great resources being put out there by everyone today. I will keep mine short. I want to reiterate what Eric just said. Please look for your local watershed council, soil and water conservation districts. These folks can really be a great help as you're navigating all these different funding options, trying to coordinate site visits, and be a general resource as you're navigating this time. OWEB, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, does provide grant opportunities around the state for restoration work, and we have multiple different grant programs. We don't have any set up right now that are immediately specific for fire response, but we do have existing grant programs that local watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and other entities can navigate as they're thinking about long term. We are also convening our local partners, the councils, the districts, and the land trusts over the coming weeks in order to talk about what are their local needs, what are the short and long-term funding needs that they're seeing, so we can figure out how we can support these local communities moving forward. Individual landowners cannot apply to OWEB grants, but again, that's why it's really important to connect with your local partners that can provide you support in navigating these various funding opportunities.
Great, thank you so much, Courtney. So let's go ahead and transition into some Q&A. And again, Steve and Daniel in the background have been working to answer all of your questions. So go ahead, if you didn't hear your question out loud, look in the answered section of the Q&A. So we have a question here from Teresa and Heather from NRCS. I think you're going to answer this, but what can a small forest owner do ahead of time to make sure they're actually eligible? Example, EQIP application asks for registration with FDA. Does that mean we need to form a legal entity like a tree farm, LLC, or some other sort of business in order to participate or qualify?
Thanks, Carrie and Teresa, for that question. So any individual landowner can apply. You do not have to have an entity. So just do the original assessment of your property, take pictures, download the Oregon State Extension Rapid Assessment, look at how many acres you have, where that location is, which county, some roads. If you do have a map, that would be really helpful. So doing that pre-planning of what is the concerns that you have, down trees, soil loss, maybe some steepness of your property, what slope that is projected at. That's the general information that would be awesome to have to provide to our district conservationists and planners. So that is the pre-planning work that can be done. And then you can come into the NRCS office and work through the with that local person. So any small landowner can apply. Again, and it is, we're looking at non-industrial private timberlands also. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Heather. And so this next question, again, is for the agency partners. What rules, restrictions should landowners be aware of when considering erosion control efforts in ephemeral and perennial active streams?
Well, that sounds like a good question for ODS and the Forest. It's a Forest Practices Act related question, and I'm not feeling well equipped to provide an answer here in this forum, but would be happy to follow up and get you in touch with the right person, or encourage you to reach out to your local stewardship forester to kind of take that on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And someone asked, can I include the link to the rapid assessment that was just mentioned? And I have to admit, I was multitasking. Heather, did you mention a rapid assessment, or are you talking about the checklist?
Yeah, I did mention the rapid assessment, the one that Daniel was kind of projecting on his PowerPoint as well. Right. And I believe Andrew had been in collaboration with Daniel on that rapid assessment.
Fantastic. And that link has been shared in the chat box. And again, it will be on the fire program website, as well as I will send you an email the next day or so with all this information. So I don't see any other questions, but I know that earlier on we had someone ask about their 15-year-old plantation, and it was actually 500 trees per acre, and they've sent us photos, and Steve would like to share his screen right now.
Okay, so this was sent by John. Can everybody see these series of photos? I just want you to get a sense of what John was talking about. I'll start at the top row. You can, starting from the left, we'll move to the right. So at the top left, that first left photo, you can see they're very small trees, not merchantable. And I think certainly you could underplant this, but over time you'll have a lot of debris around them, and it could pose a future fire hazard to them. If we move to the right, now through the windshield, we see some older, larger trees. Looks like some of those are merchantable. I don't know how severe they're burned, but there's some merchantable trees there. You might be able to do some, if you've got some merchantable trees, you might be able to do it in patches and then reforest those patches. If we move again, row 1 to the right, pretty dense. Some of those, you've got a dirt road, and a lot of those trees are not merchantable, but very dense. So I probably would not underplant those. I think in some places, well, you'll have to figure out how you can remove that material off-site and chip it or something like that. It would not be cheap. I'm going to skip down to the second row because I think there's second row, the far left photo. So you see some trees. It looks like a couple of those trees right to the left of the mirror. Those two are small, but they're merchantable, assuming they're not burned too bad. But a lot of the other trees behind it are not. And so this is, I was thinking that you might be able to have a harvester go in and pick out the merchantable trees, and in some ways be able to provide avenues for which you could plant trees back through that. I'm going to go to the third row where you have a pickup on the gravel road. And it looks like some of the trees in the first photo on the left and then the next photo to the right, it looks like there's trees that are merchantable there. And so those probably would help pave the way, and you could harvest this patch and then replant it. So maybe some of your property that has merchantable trees might help offset what you're going to have to do where you have unmerchantable trees. I'm going to go down one more line, and yep, far left, I see the mirror. Those trees are not merchantable. The next photo to the right, they're not merchantable. You might be able to plant trees in that one. And then the third photo shows a couple of small but potentially merchantable trees with, looks like a pile that's burning. I see some red soil back there. That might be an opening that you could plant and maybe underplant some of the trees there. So maybe the planting that you would do in here is kind of patchy. So those are just some thoughts based on what I see right here. Thanks, John, for sharing those. I really appreciate that.
That helps illustrate a lot of the points. And so I don't think, Steve and Daniel, you answered this in the Q&A, and I want to make sure I've seen this question. Will allowing natural regeneration alone create problems for registration in forest land deferral for tax purposes? And we are going to be having a tax session later on in the series, later on in October, but does anybody on the call here know that? Will allowing natural regeneration alone create problems for registration in forest land deferral for tax purposes?
I tried to answer it. I didn't answer it completely.
Okay.
So the forest deferral is run by your county assessor. It goes through your county assessor's program. And I think natural regeneration is, as I mentioned to a couple of people, is pretty iffy. That is, it's never assured that you're going to get natural regeneration because one, even if you have enough trees to potentially reseed, cone crops are highly irregular. So good cone crops for Douglas fir and ponderosa pine are every 7 to 8 years. And so if you're waiting several years for natural regeneration to occur, and in the meantime, all this vegetation comes back, even when you get a cone crop, it may not result in seedlings because now the site's completely occupied by competing vegetation. And so I mean, I like natural regeneration. I do it, but I never bank on it. I always plant. And then if I get some additional natural regeneration over time, I consider it a bonus. But I think that would have to be worked out with the county assessor. And if, I don't know, Ryan, if ODF service foresters kind of review those forest deferral plans for individual landowners, and maybe that's where this answer goes, or where this should go to.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It does vary a lot by county, and it depends on the county assessor's office. I typically do direct those questions back to the county assessor, but it wouldn't hurt to also talk with your local stewardship forester. They often have a good sense kind of how things are working in each county. Sorry, I'm striking out on providing solid answers here on some of these questions today.
That's okay. So if you have questions for our agency partners, go ahead and get that in the Q&A. And I'm just going to follow up with a question from Steve and Daniels. Let's see here. I apologize if you've answered this already. I have a small lot, not enough logs to sell. Are you aware of any resources to help me determine whether on-site milling to use the lumber for rebuilding makes sense financially?
There are people who have portable sawmills, and they saw up lumber, or they purchase logs. there's a directory that Extension has, the one that Scott Levengood does, that there may be, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but where maybe those logs could be offered, and see if you get anybody to bite on them. But part of it is, I don't know if you have anybody to fall the trees and actually make them into logs and bring them to what we call a landing, a spot where then a portable sawmill would then be able to saw them up into lumber. I do know of landowners who have their own sawmills and have sawn up their own lumber to build their own barns. But Daniel, did you have a question?
Just a comment. You might consider, if your neighbors are in a similar situation, to get with neighbors. There's an economy of scale that makes some harvesting and milling and production of wood a lot more feasible if there were more acres involved. That's one aspect. But the other is that Scott Levengood's list, I think, weren't we going to put that on the webpage too?
Tiffany did. It's called the Oregon Forest Industries Directory. It's in the chat.
So that's available, but there, like Steve said, there's a lot of portable mills around, and if you find the right person, and it will depend on the quality of your wood, the size of your wood, the demand of that wood. There's a lot to consider, but a lot of times it's better to get with neighbors and other people in the area to have a combined timber sale.
Great, and thank you, Tiffany, for putting that link in there. Selling, someone just mentioned selling the wood for firewood is an option as well. Let's see here. Just making sure I've covered everything. I think one last one here. I think we might have covered this, but can you recommend a reputable company that does landslide prevention in a burned area? The entire hillside behind our home is burned. We live on the North Santiam River in Lyons, Oregon.
Yeah, I don't know if our other agency partners have a list of contractors. I'd let them answer if they have one.
So I can speak for ODS, and we can't recommend a specific contractor, but I do know that, as I mentioned earlier, our district offices do maintain local lists of contractors that are available for different kinds of work, and folks can certainly check in with the office or with the stewardship forester to get a copy of that.
I would also add that your local soil and water conservation district will have local contractors they often work with for erosion issues.
Fantastic. And Brad, a colleague of ours on the line here, reminded us that the Oregon Forest Directory is an interactive site that can help you find a variety of providers for forest services by region in the state. So definitely check out that link. Oh, there's some more questions in the chat. Will the Q&A be accessible online? And Charles, I sure am hoping so. I believe that Zoom records the Q&A, and so what I'll do is I'll try to get that in a document and post that on the website as well. If you don't see it there in the next day or so, that means Zoom didn't record it. Thank you, Katie. She says this has been terrific. So from Lynn, we have 17 acres of forest bordering national forests that burned severely. Lots of steep slope. One slope backs along the properties of several properties which the homes were destroyed and are likely to want to rebuild. Should we be thinking of how to prevent erosion from impacting their properties?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I would.
I would agree.
And I think I saw just one more here in the chat. I just want to make sure that I get everybody's.
There's one about homes up near Detroit. Where is that?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. The city of Detroit had a high percentage of homes and trees destroyed by the Beachy fire. Some of the houses border the government-owned forest land. Does anyone know if those government entities plan on taking down those dead standing trees to help with safety aspects?
I think it's worth bringing up to the ranger district there, because they're going to have to, fire's still not out, but they're going to have to prioritize safety and the salvage that would go with that. And I think voicing concern about the liability that creates bordering private land would be important in their assessment as they go about how they're going to triage federal land and federal land that borders private land, or in this case, even a town.
Great answer. Well, it looks like the Q&A is cleared and the chat box has been checked. So I'm going to take a moment here to say, and as I said that, one more came in. My husband has already placed a few waffles on steep slope along the North Santiam River. Does that disqualify us from NRCS? That's a great question.
So anything that was put in place ahead of time would not be considered for our Farm Bill program, so in the Environmental Quality Incentives program. So that's why it's really important just to do that assessment, take pictures, come into the NRCS office, and then your local service center will work with you to see what the next steps would be.
Great. Well, as we're nearing the end here, I really want to thank you all for joining us today in this 2-hour session. And a huge thank you to all the presenters who in a very short notice came together to create this opportunity for you. Please tell us what you thought about today's webinar by filling out a very brief survey immediately following the webinar. And hopefully a pop-up window should appear in your browser, but if not, I'll get you in that email. Don't forget to join us next week, same day and time, Thursday, October 8th at 3 p.m. for a presentation on hazard tree awareness and erosion in post-fire landscapes. With that, I think I'll close it for the night, and thank you everybody for joining us.